Welcome to this program of Centro Primo Levi, the launching of Serena Di Nepi's new book, Surviving the Ghetto, published by Brill. This in 2021 and translated by Paul Rosenberg. I'm delighted that Emily Michelson of University of St. Andrews and David Malkiel of Babilan University have joined us for this presentation. And I'd like to thank Giuseppe Veltri of Universitat Hamburg, who is the editor-in-chief of Brill's series, Studies in Jewish History and Culture, who brought this book to fruition and is here to say a few welcoming words. So at the center, we have followed Serena's research for many years as part of Centro Primo Levi's effort to explore the historical gaze, I would call it, of the Jewish minority in Italy. Among its many compelling traits, the book provides new tools and data to think about the ghetto as part of the genesis of the modern nation state. Serena focuses on the time of the ghetto's formation, the very beginning, and analyzes specifically the perspective of the Jewish community that was holding on to its own sense of legitimacy and also its recognized legitimacy, and tried to redefine itself at a time of major transformations in the European conception of governance. The scholar Mahmoud Mamdani described this moment as the process of mutual shaping of the nation state and the colonial state that emerges at the end of the so-called Reconquista, the fall of the Nasrid kingdom and the rise of the Christian kingdoms, and is epitomized by the law of the pureza de sangre, the purity of blood. Between these two models, the state and the colony, direct and indirect rule, one a beneficiary of a surplus of language and subjectivity, and the other deprived not only of land, but of its own language and self-defining gaze, the ghetto is born. And in relation to the ghetto, the politicization of religion and blood take their own particular course. The Jews were not only singled out as defined as minority in this new setting, but ended up defining as the only minority left in Europe the concept for centuries to come. And so I leave now the stage to our panelist, and I look forward to seeing you again here and to this discussion after the program. Thank you. Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you to all of you for being here to listen to very good specialists of Renaissance studies here. Therefore, we'll be very short because I'm here for two very good reasons. First of all, because I like the research of Serena Di Nepi, because my research also is very close to her, but also because I'm a specialist of Renaissance, and therefore it's very, very close to the whole discussion on the ghetto. And therefore my interest is a very scientific one to be here. The second one, because I am also the editor of the series Study in Jewish History and Culture at Brill. Brill is not in Leiden. Brill is very close to New York. It's in Boston with the office. And this is with Kathleen Sheen and Erika Mandarino, a very, very beautiful partner of publication. Until now, we published in the series 65 books and 67 books, and the book of Serena is 65. That is very, very young and in my series. The topic is very important to the series because also of the new insights in the ghetto of Rome. As a specialist of the ghetto of Venice, you know, and I see there is Benjamin David also in the audience. I hope he will also intervene in this discussion. And the ghetto of Venice is well studied. There's a lot of publication in ghetto of Venice also because of the importance of Venice. But of the ghetto of Rome are very few books. very few publications, and therefore the book of Dr. Di Nepi is a background in this discussion. I will not do to say a lot, also because I try to make her and not to put questions to her. Therefore, I will be silent, but to be very attentive listener of the whole discussion. Thank you, Natalia, for the invitation. Thank you to the center, Primo Levi Center. It's very busy in everything with Italian Judaism, and therefore I'm very. It's a very good occasion to speak about the ghetto of Rome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe. And please, David Marchiel will begin with some comments on the book.
Thank you, Natalia. I'm delighted to be here participating in this event. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to make a few points, and the first part of my comments will be about elements in the book that stood out, that were prominent to me at least. First, with regard to the form of communal government in Rome. Serena describes the form of government that was drawn up by Daniel da Pisa in 1524, and this was a mix of economic strata and ethnic groups. I want to point out that this was particular to Rome. In the Middle Ages, it was normal for those with deep pockets to control communal government, and this was also true in the communities that sprang up in central and northern Italy, beginning in the Trecento. But in Rome, the governing structure is different. It interweaves the economic pyramidal structure with the ethnic composition of the Jewish population. And that's what's unique, this synthesis of the economic strata with the ethnic composition. Then I want to comment on the discussion of the position of the rabbis in the Jewish community of Rome. And the main point is that the social and political status of rabbis in the Rome community rises in the period under discussion. This is one of the major social developments that the book explores. Serena notes that as the role of the bankers grew more important, so did the role of the notaries, who now keep records in Italian as well as Hebrew. And that's related to the fact that these notaries are rabbis. There's the example that's discussed at some length is a rabbi named Pompeo del Borgo, and she notes that his documents are mostly private agreements, in contrast to the documents produced by the Piatelli notaries who were surveyed by Kenneth Stowe. The documents of those notaries were communal documents. First of all, I would like to comment that the role of the rabbis, as it's described here, is quite different from the role that they occupy in other communities in Italy. Generally, the role of the rabbi is a marginal role in communal administration. That's not where they're active. Their influence is usually limited to ritual matters. So the question that arises is, why did this happen? Why did the rabbis become more important and play a prominent role? Serena makes 2 points about this. First, turning to the rabbis was a practical measure because under the new circumstances of the ghetto, the pressures rose as the diverse economic and ethnic groups now lived cheek by jowl, and the community needed a mechanism that everyone could accept, which of course was intended to serve as an alternative, a preferable alternative to going outside the Jewish community. That's an option that no one preferred, although of course it was quite popular. Now, this explanation assumes that ghettoization displaced a large number of people from residences in other neighborhoods of the city. That I don't know if that's true, but it's not substantiated in this book. And Serena, moreover, acknowledges that Jews did tend to live together with one another even before the ghetto forced them to do so. So we also still want to know why rabbis, in particular, were considered to be the optimal cohesive force. Why not the wealthy lay leadership? Please tell me that you can hear me. Okay, I'm continuing.
Yes, you're continuing.
Okay. The second point that Serena makes is that turning to the rabbis was in a way analogous to the counter-Reformation approach of the church, which sought to strengthen identity and institutions in the face of external threat. The external threat is, of course, Protestantism, just as the Jews now face a threat from the oppressive measures of the church, of the papacy. This is a fascinating point because we see that the Jews are doing something analogous to what the church is doing. And I find that paradoxical because the church is the force that is persecuting them or discriminating against them. But I have to add that Jews probably did not experience a weakening of their Jewish identity and heritage. I think that if that were the case, they would have dispensed with rabbis and also with the use of Hebrew. So that does not seem to be what's happening from their point of view. We have to comment in this context that what we are seeing challenges the image of Roman Jewry in particular, but of Italian Jewry and of Italy in general, as being entering now into a period that used to be known as La Decadenza, going back to Burckhardt and the Romantic historians. So much for my comments about the rabbis. I want to turn to the bankers. Now, the legislation that is presented here gives the impression that banking becomes increasingly unprofitable, but actually we then learn that the bankers were doing very well. So I want to comment in this context that this finding is also true for Venice, where we now know for some time that banking continued to be profitable. There's a lot of complaining about how unprofitable it is, but I think that that's a rhetoric that needs to be read critically. There are studies about that, of course, by our great leader, Brian Pullen. I've written about it. So I think that's a point of contact or analogy between the experience in Rome and the experience in Venice. In general, I would say that what we're learning here about the situation of the bankers fits in nicely with a revisionist approach to early modern Italy in general, as I said before, regarding the image of the era as one of decline, la decadenza. And in this context, I would cite, it's not new anymore, but it's still valuable, the book by Richard Tilden Rapp, Industry and Economic Decline in 17th Century Venice, where he is speaking out against this very image of decline or decadence. Now, Serena notes that the Jewish bankers could not compete with their Christian competitors. The Christian bankers had far more capital to play with. So the Jews learned to diversify, meaning to move into other areas of activity. They increasingly found new niches in which to make money, which is a point I'm going to come back to in a minute. And her third point with regard to the bankers is that they did business with converts, apostates or converts to Christianity, crossing a line which clearly was not considered taboo. And moreover, of course, it was mutually advantageous. Now, this is an idea that was explored by Jacob Katz many years ago. He explains that, of course, a convert to Christianity can lend money to Jews on behalf of a Jewish partner. That is to say, Jewish law does not allow Jews to lend money to fellow Jews. But of course, if you have a middleman who is a Christian, technically a Christian, then that becomes possible. And conversely, a convert could continue to lend money at interest to Christians if he has a Jewish partner. And it's sort of the same problem in reverse. The church does not allow Christians to lend money at interest to other Christians. So in short, both the Jew and the new Christian, the convert to Christianity, can benefit from sustaining an economic relationship. And I mean, we know from other sources, from other periods, from other studies, that this is not limited simply to pragmatic economic considerations. There really is a continued reality of overlap and interface between Jews and former Jews, let's call them. Just to cite an example, I wrote about this in the context of medieval Ashkenaz, and it's no less true here, is what we're learning. Okay, so moving on from banking to other forms of economic activity. One of the most fascinating and groundbreaking discussions is that of the fardelli, the contracts that Jews would draw up with hospitals to take over the used clothing of patients or former patients in the hospitals. And the point is made that this was a desirable venture from the point of view of the Jew who had such a contract, because it was a stable arrangement. That is to say, normally the Jews deal with used goods, which are for the most part clothing, when the client defaults on a loan. The borrower defaults on a loan, then the Jew must do something with the pawn, which is an article of clothing in many cases. Then it goes up for auction, as everyone knows. So in this case, this arrangement with the hospitals is not subject to the circumstance of the borrower being unable to repay the loan. It's a contract so that with a certain regularity, these goods are available and the Jew is at liberty to sell them. As far as I know, this arrangement is unprecedented in Jewish economic history. The Jews, as everyone knows, go into the sale of used clothing as a sideline to their pawnbroking activity. But here we see like a new twist in that story. It's a fantastic innovation. My hat is off to them and to Serena for exploring it and revealing it to us. It's of course, it's maybe the best example or one of the best examples here of what I mentioned earlier, the diversification, striking out into new directions, finding new opportunities. There's a certain irony which in the fact that the hospital would insist that a neophyte seeking a fardelli contract must have a Jewish partner. And this was the case because the hospital could trust the solvency of the Jewish banker. He was an affluent person, but the convert was an unknown entity, and the hospitals were not so sure that he was reliable. So here again, this is really an inversion of what we would expect to see in terms of how strong the Jews' position actually was. The point that the neophyte, they're the weak link, they're the weak partners in this arrangement. After the fardelli, there's a discussion of real estate, another new niche. We find that the Jews are dealing in market spaces. I think they're probably about the size of a booth or a table. We're not talking about what we would consider to be a storefront. But and this business is based on the Jews' legal principle or right to use gazaga, chazaka in Hebrew, which is simply that to have a monopoly on a certain activity. In this case, on space. It's a monopoly on space. And Jews would buy and sell the right to occupy a certain spot for business purposes. A wonderful example of diversification of the entrepreneurial spirit. And the point is made that these spaces are not limited to land inside the ghetto. They're also outside the ghetto in the city, including Piazza Navona, which I found really quite striking. I mean, this isn't altogether surprising, since we know that ghettoization does not restrict the Jews to the confines of the ghetto during business hours. So that in itself is not a new finding. Nevertheless, it exemplifies that the policy towards the Jews, the Jewry policy in counter-Reformation Rome, was not altogether restrictive, certainly not the way one might perhaps assume in the era of cum nimis absurdum, the highly restrictive legislation issued in 1555. The discussion then moves to Jewish travel. We learned that Jews traveled between cities to do business, buying and selling. Travel was, of course, important because commodities would be cheaper in one place, more expensive in another place. So this mobility offered an opportunity to make money. It was contingent upon having a safe conduct, sort of an internal passport or a free travel pass, which could be obtained from the camerlengo, the chamberlain, a church official. Again, it seems to contradict the spirit of cum nimis absurdum, which seeks to restrict Jewish freedom, but nevertheless, obviously, the authorities allowed this, and the camerlengo is a papal figure, and it's not expressly prohibited in cum nimis absurdum or subsequent legislation. The point is made that the Jews who travel around the papal territories collecting taxes for the church take advantage of their safe conduct to conduct personal business as well. Again, they're always looking for new ways to get ahead, to better their position. I have to comment that given what we've seen of the entrepreneurial spirit of the Jews of Rome, frankly, I was expecting to see that there was a market in the purchase and sale of safe conduct, but I guess that did not happen. It's like that's all that was missing to complete the picture for me about how innovative and creative these people were in finding ways to survive. As far as the camerlengo is concerned, the camerlengo did not only issue the safe conduct, he was also responsible for issuing the license to lend money at interest. This is known as the inhibitio. And Serena points out to us that through his control over the travel and in the inhibitio, it is the camerlengo who controls the Jewish leadership, who decides who will be part of the Jewish leadership by issuing or not issuing a safe conduct or an inhibitio. She notes that the banker who has the inhibitio enjoys the backing of the camerlengo in collecting debts from Christian borrowers. This again is one of these ironic twists to the situation of the Jew in Rome in this period. The camerlengo, in fact, in his role vis-a-vis the Jews of Rome, exemplifies, as I said, the Jews' adaptability, notwithstanding the discriminatory policies of cum nimis absurdum, and the complexity of church policy, because it simultaneously applies pressure to the Jews in the hopes of demoralizing them, but it also actively supports their business activities. And both of these things are true. Having commented on elements in the book that stood out to me, I'm going to talk briefly about the book's thesis. Now, at first glance, I mean, certainly in the first few chapters or pages, the book seems to proffer the familiar image of the Jews of Rome in this period, which is a gloomy image. She speaks at length about ghettoization as persecution, as a step on the road towards expulsion, and it's situated within a framework of aggressive, even violent evangelization. This perspective is problematic for several reasons. First of all, in the Quattrocento, the preaching of Franciscan and Dominican preachers, such as Bernardino da Feltre, Bernardino da Siena, leads to anti-Jewish agitation and even expulsion, that is to say, before the period of ghettoization. And when we look at the situation from this perspective or against this background, we see the 16th century as a period of recovery. It starts with the creation of the ghetto in Venice, where the Jews, of course, had not been allowed to live until the War of the League of Cambrai and the subsequent creation of the ghetto. So that in general, not only in Venice, but throughout Italy, the ghetto represents a new equilibrium, a new policy of limited toleration, and in fact, it guarantees the Jews' survival. The institution of the ghetto is the end of the era of expulsions. I mean, we know about the expulsions of 1569 from the Papal States, but if we look at the early modern era, in fact, that's a last gasp. The Jews are now a permanent part of the scene. I mean, I want to make it clear, let's not forget that many of the condotta were still temporary. So it's not as though they receive an indefinite legal status. It's still renegotiated and so forth, but in fact, the expulsions end. Okay, I'm going to move on in terms of the problematic side of this gloomy image. When we talk about ghettoization, it's important to remember that Jews lived in close proximity to one another throughout the Middle Ages by choice. And sometimes, in fact, they lived behind walls. A famous example is Speyer. In 1084, we have the texts that tell us exactly what the conditions were. The ghetto differs in closing the gates at night and in the fact that these gates are policed. It's not the first instance of Jews choosing to live among themselves. Now, and as I mentioned before, we also mustn't forget that men were largely unaffected, at least during the day. They were allowed to move about the city freely so as to conduct their business affairs. What is also not new is that cum nimis absurdum puts forward old regulations that we've seen before. For example, the prohibition against having Christian servants, the requirement to wear a distinguishing sign. These go back to the Lateran councils of the Middle Ages. They're not new. And of course, as always, the restrictions stand to a certain degree. They are in tension with Augustine's doctrine, later accepted by Gregory the Great, the doctrine of witness, and so on. And for the most part, these restrictions are honored in the breach. They remain on the books, but throughout the Middle Ages, that's as far as it goes. So we wonder, why are these disabilities restored now? They've been on the books for centuries. It seems to me that the Pope just couldn't tolerate a reality or situation in which the status quo of the Jews remains unchanged. It remains what it was for all this time, while at the very same time, the papacy is locked in a struggle with Christian unbelievers, namely the Protestant Reformation. It sort of reminds me, this is just a casual association, of the argument we read about the First Crusade, that as the Crusaders set forth, they tell one another, we're going far away to fight this war against the infidel, but the infidel is at home, the Jews. So let's finish them off first and then go on our way. That's almost word for word what they are reported to have said. So here too, I mean, the Jews are I don't want to say a fifth column, but they're certainly the infidel at home. And while the church is having this terrible struggle with the new phenomenon of Christian infidels in Europe, in Western Europe, the Jews are going about their business. That was unacceptable. Now, of course, all of these restrictive regulations, these disabilities, I mean, for millennia, they have testified to an opposite reality. That is to say, the reality that interaction between Jews and Christians was intense. There was commensality, there were sexual liaisons, and what have you. Wine drinking, that's also there's a lot of ink spilled about Jews drinking wine, Gentile wine, etc. The classic example is the distinguishing sign, which testifies to how native, how Italian the Jews must have been. Why you wouldn't need a distinguishing sign? The reason you need one is because you can't tell a Jew from a Christian. If you would talk to him or her, you wouldn't even know that that person is different. So nothing testifies more eloquently to the acculturation and integration of the Jews in Italian society and culture than these attempts to marginalize them. In any case, having said all of that about what's wrong with this image of Roman Jewry, now I'm quickly going to go on to say that that's not Serena's view. In that argument is the straw man in this book. The body of the book knocks it down convincingly through an exploration of all kinds of new and wonderful archival sources. She explains that one might get the impression that papal legislation, particularly cum nimis absurdum, led to a continuous precipitous decline in the Jews' economic fortunes, as well as this conversionary pressure. This is a terrible portrayal, but this image applies to the less fortunate among the Jews of Rome, mediocri, the poor people. It does not apply to the elite, the bankers and the other affluent members of the community. These people, as we've already mentioned, display exemplary flexibility. They maneuver to maintain their fortunes, to navigate the system. They sustain their social position, including their relations with those in power, their quality of life. So all of these, the things we've been talking about, the banking, fardelli, and so on, flesh out the image of Roman Jewry as successful at meeting the challenge of the Counter-Reformation policy. Serena notes in support of this thesis that the Jews continue to use Hebrew, and this is contrary to the traditional image of its abandonment in the early modern era, particularly beginning in the 17th century as a result of the pressure from the papacy. I looked at this problem, the use of Hebrew, in my study of the Hebrew tombstones of Padova. There too, you see all the way down to the 19th century, into the Ottocento, people are still, they want Hebrew. It's their language. They may not even understand it, but they love it. She also notes that the Jews of Rome continue to donate precious Judaica objects to the synagogue, which demonstrates the strength of their affiliation, and of course also their affluence. This is true for regions all over Italy, and again, it contradicts the thesis that the Jews were in a period of decline. So what was their secret? What was the secret of the Jews' success in meeting the challenge of the pressures of the Counter-Reformation? Serena notes that we should take note of the strength of the Jews' communal institutions. Robert Bonfield wrote that long before cum nimis absurdum, the Jews of Italy emphasized their difference from, and indeed their superiority to, the surrounding culture. His study of Judah Messer-Leon's Hebrew rhetoric is a classic example. And I recently spoke about this idea that a minority group will instinctively recoil, will reject assimilatory pressures. I have to stop soon anyway. I think I'm taking up too much time, but it's something that I've spoken about, and I have a written version coming. One of the most important facets of Serena's book is her approach to the subject. And what comes up very powerfully and repeatedly is that the study of Roman Jewry in its relations with the papacy must rest within a broader context. We have to take note of political and other considerations that the papacy was facing in this era. I think that's very important. I don't want to go on about it at any length. I'm sure other people will speak about this. So I'll just talk about one example that caught my eye. It was a very powerful one, and that is the Christian junk dealers, the Rigattieri, who were studied by Carlo Maria Travaglini in a fascinating article. He even writes about their interaction with the Jews of Rome, because they are competitors. Sometimes they cooperate with each other, but they're mostly operating in a very similar realm. And it's important to look at the Jews again from this broader perspective. The common theme, if we look at the Rigattieri and the Jews together, if we put them together to study them, what we see is the significance of looking at minor or marginal realms of economic activity in order to appreciate the overall picture, the larger picture. Now, in general, this is how people have been studying Jewish history in the medieval and early modern period of European history. You want to understand the majority, take a look at the minority, because they will be a reflection of the themes and problems going on in the larger society. In short, I'm going to finish. The title of Serena's book, Surviving the Ghetto, is misleading because it is unduly apologetic. The thrust of the book is that the Jews did not just survive. They learned how to work the system, how to get what they want. At least the powerful families did, and they remained powerful for generations. The title reflects this use of the straw man, the image of Roman Jewry that goes back to the 19th century and early 20th century. I'll conclude with some notes for future inquiry. The study focuses on the Italiani, on that particular ethnic group. Very little attention is devoted to the Iberian arrivals. Now, in fact, the discussion of the role of the Spanish Jews in Italy mostly begins with expulsion in 1492, but we have some recent scholarship by Joseph Hacker, from which we learned that, in fact, there was travel back and forth in the peninsulas in the Middle Ages. Prophet Duran is a lovely example. There are lots. It's a very important point which needs to be developed further. I would bring Provence into the discussion and start to look at Italy, Provence, and Spain as a Mediterranean cultural unit. But that's another story. The study is presented, the book is presented as a study of the modern period, meaning the early modern period, the age of the ghetto, but the book focuses on the 16th century, beginning with Cum Nimis Absurdum. And what we don't know that much from this book about the 18th century, even the latter 17th century, and so on. I learned that it was in 1682 that the papacy outlaws Jewish money lending in Rome, and I think that this is more or less the terminus ad quem of Serena's study. I want to mention an important article by Giuseppe Sermonetta in Hebrew many years ago about the rabbis of Rome in the Settecento. And his work is based on rabbinic sources, which is a different method than the archival work that we're looking at here. He has a few conclusions, which I think will help round out the picture a little bit. First of all, he knows that in the Settecento, Jewish culture flourishes among the rabbis of Rome, although that's not so clearly the case in the Seicento. 17th century seems to have been a bit of a downturn, but it's a surprising fact that in the 1700s, things pick up. He notes that rabbis express awareness of and appreciation of the intellectual currents that are in the general community. It's also important in terms of acculturation and not feeling marginalized. And he puts the point of decline as emancipation, which happened in other countries as well. One more point, Serena focuses on the upper strata of Jewish society in Rome. We don't know that much about those who don't, and they don't make it into the sources because they don't have any money or power. This is a common problem in archival history. It's also true, of course, for Sermoneta's article. You don't know about people if they don't appear in the sources. I want to end with one word, and I hope Serena and Emily will help me out with this. I was fascinated by her introduction of the notion of confessionalization. It's a word that starts out with a very, very narrow, it appears in a very narrow context, but I think in recent years, people have begun using it in analogous or different contexts, and I think it might be very helpful to as a line of further inquiry with respect to Serena's subject of interest. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry if I took too long.
Thank you so much, David. It's been extremely interesting, and now we're going to hear from Emily.
So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you so much to Serena and Natalia for inviting me. I think that in a book launch, it's important to have the book. So I want to show you my copy of the book with all of its some of its markings, because I'm very happy to have my copy here to talk about. And if you'll forgive me, I want to start with a couple of words about the scholar Serena Di Nepi briefly. Because if you know her, you know that she's a colleague who instinctively, among other scholars, likes to bring people together, to introduce them to each other. And in that way, she's a tremendously important builder of scholarly community, which we all sorely need. And this comes out of her character as a warm person and someone who has made a point of befriending me, as she has befriended so many other scholars. So it's a great pleasure to get to give back a little bit some of her generosity in discussing this book today. And I think that it's going to be a foundational book for 16th century Jewish studies, in part because of what David said. It focuses on Jewish agency and Jewish people as actors. And the people in her book are so very real. And in addition to that, it's important for many other areas of scholarship that touch on the subject of Jews in Rome in the 16th century or that parallel it. And one of the things, that's what I'm going to speak about today a little more, is the connection with other concurrent trends in scholarship today. One of the things that makes this book valuable is the way that it balances very broad themes with specific stories and anecdotes that come out of Serena's time in the archives, many of which are unknown to other scholars of the topic. And one very nice example of this is her story of the banker Salomon Ram, which she sets up as a story of what happens as a result of Communis absurdum, right? And you're expecting to hear a story about how economically detrimental this papal bull is and how much it sort of destroys families within the Jewish community. And while that is certainly true, what she shows in this case is that for wealthy families, yes, they are finding new footing and changing professions and finding ways to get ahead in the new circumstances, but it isn't actually the decree that dooms them, because the Ram family seems to be just fine for a very long time. And instead, it seems possible that what undoes them in the end is not the papal policy, but the fact that one of them is involved in being a courier for cases of false currency. It's his own crimes that undo him, and not, and not these broad sweeps of history in a direct way. So she's putting the focus back on people and not only on broad concepts, while paying attention, obviously, to both of them. Another thing that I think is really valuable about this book is the attention that she pays to near misses, cases that could have become tremendous tragedies but don't, and that in themselves are tremendously revealing. So she brings the false testimony of a Jewish woman who, in the course of a long and protracted trial, claims that she intends to convert. She really, really does intend to convert. And then Serena goes back and looks at the case, and it turns out that a couple of years later, when she's back in court, she's still Jewish. But at the same time, her brother has converted. There's a lot of pressure on her. The family is now a mixed family. And you can see through the lens of this one life, the complex lived experience of the broader papal policies. Another similar example is a near miss case of a blood libel in 1555. I will let you read all of the juicy details in the book itself, but essentially there is a dead child, there is a violent father, there is an illicit relationship, and there's a lot of potential for things to get very bad very quickly. And yet there's a sort of moment of pulling back, and it's a blood libel that does not come to the worst conclusions. And this is a particularly poignant example that she brings in light of other recent work on blood libels. So I know that Martina Mampieri has looked at this case, and Magda Tirer has her new book on the blood libel in a much broader context. And in that broad context, it's important to understand in between cases like this one. And I think that this attention to the what ifs of history, which Serena is very attuned to, are very valuable because they give a sense of the precarity of Jewish life in this period, and they give a sense of what it means to live through the conversionary environment of mid-16th century Rome, even at a moment when we have to talk about it in all of its complexity. And they also show us the limits and also the richnesses of the archival record. These stories remind us of how much we still don't know, how much we can still learn from these archives, from returning to stories that we thought were familiar. And at the same time, to understand that the stories that we do have are partial, right? They're incomplete. There's always more that we don't know about what happened, and that we shouldn't jump to conclusions based on the partial stories that we have. And that on the other hand, she's showing how much we can do with the records that we do have. I think all of that, I realize a lot of that I just said was very hypothetical, but it's what comes out of looking at cases that could have gone in multiple directions. And Serena has really shown nicely how that works. She also touches on broader themes that are very much of this moment in scholarship. And two of these are the themes of mobility and material culture. As David mentioned earlier, she gives a lot of attention to the stracci trade, to the fardelli, to the trade in used clothes and in cloth, and really shows us how that works on a granular level. And she also looks a lot at traveling Jewish merchants and travel permits, as we've seen, which remind us that Rome, for all of the scholarly attention that it deservedly receives, does not exist in a vacuum, but remains intricately connected to the rest of the Papal States and to the rest of Italy through familial and personal connections. In her discussion of these two topics, we get a really vivid picture of Jewish people and Jewish life in 16th century Italy, but we also see how the book participates in new and emerging scholarships. So this book made me think of Rosa Salzberg on mobility, of Zoe Farrell, who works on mobility and material culture with merchants in the north of Italy, on Cesare Santos with his work on interfaith encounter in Rome and Eastern Orthodox Christians. So there's so much being done now on encounter and travel that this work participates in really nicely. And in particular, it's an interesting counterpoint to new work on slavery and forced migration, some of which is being done by Serena herself, because both topics show how people function within an uneven power dynamic, but they also are not stories that are opposite to each other. And they're stories that are contiguous and topics that are contiguous and that we can learn from studying them both together, but they're not stories of somebody on one end of the social spectrum and somebody on the other. And that makes them more interesting to see together. She touches on the very important theme, as David has mentioned, of Christian-Jewish relations and confirms what we know about conversion in early modern Italy, that despite all of the proclamations from the Holy See, converts and their Jewish families continue to interact, to work together, to talk to each other, and that these stories are always stories about family dynamics and not only stories about policy. And in an entirely different area, as David has mentioned, she talks about the Camerlengo and the importance of the Camerlengo and the relationship between Jews and this Vatican official for understanding the dynamics of Jewish agency in the early modern period, and the importance of building up personal relationships between individual Roman Jews and individual Camerlengi. And I would add here that this is a topic that is not only necessary for understanding Jewish agency, but also important for understanding the workings of the Holy See in this period, for understanding the institution of the papacy. And that if you want to know in future how the Camerlengo works, the office of Camerlengo works, you have to understand how the Camerlengo interacts with Jews, and this is where you go to find out. In similar ways, this is an important book for the study of early modern Rome. And early modern Rome is at the moment, let's call it a re-emerging field, particularly in light of the Companion to Early Modern Rome, published a couple of years ago, and which has become the point of reference for all things Rome. And I will also mention a recent publication, A Companion to Religious Minorities in Early Modern Rome, which I mention because Serena's contribution to that volume is also extremely valuable. And this is a book that fits with both of them because it shows Rome as a vibrant, dynamic, evolving place, and a place full of encounters between people of different backgrounds, not a homogeneous place. It also fits with the broader, or with the different renewed interest in Italian Jewry, and in particular with Jewish-Christian relations within Italy. So here I'm thinking of recent work by Martina Mampieri, as I've mentioned, Lynn Westwater on Sala Coppia Sulam in Venice, Kathy Aaron Beller on the Inquisition in Modena, all of which show not only the complexity and dynamism of Jewish-Christian relations, but also, and Tamar Herzig's recent book on a Jewish convert in Ferrara and environs. These books, in many different ways, as Serena does, show the density of vertical relations. So how policies set at the top by very powerful people influence different layers of social strata all the way down, and also the reverse, how people's lived experience can have an effect on the people around them. And shows how policy, government and state policies are lived out in people's actual lives and not in some kind of hypothetical, simple universe where policies are enacted and that's it. I hope you understand what I'm saying here, that people's lives are complex, and that everybody contributes in different ways to an uneven power dynamic. And we see that really clearly in Serena's book. I would agree with what David said earlier about the way that the title Surviving the Ghetto can sometimes be read as just barely surviving the ghetto, but that's not at all what we get in Serena's book. And so maybe we should focus on the middle syllable there, the viva part. This is a book full of vibrant, very alive people. And also with his categorization of the broader fields that this work can contribute to. So certainly a discussion of confessionalism across faiths in the early modern period. And I'll help you out by defining confessionalism as affiliation in the time of religious division. How strongly do you affiliate to your faith? And what does that affiliation look like in a time when you can see many different confessions around you? It sets a solid foundation for a new study of the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly with regard to Jewish-Christian relations in Rome, but also more broadly. It reminds us of the indispensable nature, reasons to study Roman Jews in a broader geographical context. So not only with Ancona and Avignon in the Papal States, but across the Italian peninsula and also in diasporic networks across the Adriatic and across the Mediterranean. And this is absolutely vital work. And ultimately also to look at Christian institutional attitudes towards Jews, not simply as a theological concept, but also as individuals and as people with whom you have social relations. Even in the case, I'm thinking again of the Camerlengo here, we know so much about Jewish-Christian relations thanks to this book and others, but particularly to look at relations between very powerful individuals within the Curia and individual Jews. I think that might be an area of fruitful future scholarship. And in all of those directions, I hope that the scholars who will do this work will bring Serena's book with them in their satchel when in the happy future days we can all return to the archives, which Serena has mined so fruitfully and which she knows so well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. And thank you for contextualizing Serena's work in the historiographical context that I think is very helpful and helps people also find their place around. Also, many of the things you said apply quite as well to the study of the Jewish minority in more recent times. I think Centro Primo Levi does a lot of work in this field, and especially of Jews under fascism. And these tools are extremely helpful to exit certain loops, historiographical loops in which we've been stuck for a long time. So thank you for this. And I will now pass the word to Serena to respond to these comments and open the discussion. Thank you.
I was muted, of course. Always I start all the time I start something on Zoom, I'm muted. At a certain point, I will learn how to do it. Thank you very much, Natalia, for the invitation and for all the organization. Thank you, Giuseppe, for accepting this book in this wonderful series. And thank you, Emily and David, for your very interesting remarks. I have lines and lines of notes to think about for my future research. I want just to point out one or 2 points. The first one is about the title. The title, we talked the title with Cecilia Paganbelli and Marina Caffiero, who was my supervisor during my PhD, and then helped me a lot during all this time. We talked a lot about the title of this book, and it was the end of 2012 and the beginning of 2013 when the book, the first book in Italian came out. and it was a different time in Italian historiography. Now we are just observing in Italian historiography, in Italian for Italian scholars, a new direction, especially about the minorities. A new book edited by Franco Benigno and Igor Mineo, in a wonderful article by Vincenzo Lavenia on the church in Italy and the role of the church in Italy, for the first time, I think, in a general book addressing a general audience of Italian scholars, makes some reference to the works and the position of Jews and minorities in Italian history as a point to be studied at a general level. And this book surfaced 1 year ago. This is a huge new, something very new for Italian scholarship, and this is a result of the wonderful works by Marina Caffiero and Giacomo Todeschini, who did their best to explain to scholars out of Jewish studies that there is something to think about on minorities, and especially on Jewish minorities for Italian history. When we talk to the title, the historiography on Italian Jews in Italian was something just restricted to specialists on Jewish history. And we were making, not a fight, but we have the goal at that moment to change this perspective for in Italian academics. Now we have this incredible result, and a wonderful book just came out by Germano Maifreda that for the first time brings this topic to non-academic public, and he's making a wonderful work with vivid histories and vivid people. Again, with the idea that Jews are not only the persecuted one, but the real people with real life, real emotions that are part of general history, even if they keep their Judaism. This is something that now we consider as a basis for further research, but it's new in Italian historiography. I found, among many different suggestions and references that you addressed to me, the question of the safe conducts and the possibility to buy and sell them. Yes, it is a wonderful joke, but I think that it was not possible because the safe conducts, as now we know, have a lot to do with the pandemic situation of the time. The first things that people have to show when using their safe conducts is that they came from a safe city, with no quarantine, no lockdown in the last 40 days. And for this reason, it was impossible to sell them within the ghettos. My opinion is that if you look down to the list of the names, and you notice that the names of the people who are traveling across Italy to collect taxation from other Jewish communities, they are usually the youngest the younger bankers, the children of the most important bankers of the ghetto. So my idea is that they make business on this, but they made it in secret, maybe during a Shabbat morning in their synagogues. This could be a point. There is no way to find an internal contract on this, but the idea of an internal negotiation, internal agreement, and then to be brought to the external authorities is part, I think, of this way to conduct business within the ghettos. Yes, the question of the Sephardim, I have to say that I did my best to stay away from this topic because everybody knows of the huge debate and the huge scholarship on the arrival of Sephardim in Italy. I'm thinking to the debate between among Bonfil and Robert Bonfil, Amma Esposito, Ariel Toaf, and Kenneth Stowe. They say their opinion, and I definitely didn't want to be part of that discussion. I want to see what's happened after. I took for granted their arrival, and the word Ultramontani is the word in the Capitoli by Daniele da Pisa. I think, David and of Emily, that we made a point together now on the idea of a comparison we need a comparison among all the different statutes of the communities during the ghettoizations. we need to discover which are the communities and which are not. We have the general idea that there are only today's communities, the huge communities, but we know, thanks even to the works by Mauro Perani and by many other scholars, that there are little tiny places with a few group of Jews that stay in these places, even in the time of the ghettoization. It works even for papal states. We have traces of Jews in Umbria and in the Marche and in the Abruzzi after 1569. This is a work for the future, but we have to try to understand what was a ghetto, what wasn't a ghetto, even referring to the different organization of the ghetto from within the statute of the internal statute of the Jewish community, and from the outside, the external institution, what government says when they organize, when they decide to set up a ghetto. And this brings to my very last point. Now, what we did, now, both of you said something with which I totally agree. We need to overcome the ugly description of the ghetto, the era, the age of the ghetto as a pure, general pure era with persecution and poor Jews always lamenting their awful situation. It was something more complex, and I think that we need to bring politics within this narrative. We need to. We have an elephant in the room when we think to the first part of 16th century in Italy, and this elephant in the room are the Italian wars. Usually, Italian scholarship and even Jewish history scholarship made connections between the Italian wars and the establishment of the ghetto in Venice after the Battle of Agnadella. I think that we need to reconsider all the history of ghettoization within the frame of Italian wars. And we started to find some documents in the archive about this. This is a totally new field of research. I think for a collective research, it's nothing possible for one single historian because Italy is too huge. But we have just the works, Emily just quoted them, by Katie Aaron Beller, by Martina Mampieri, the wonderful book by Tamar Herzig. She said something about the arrival of the Sephardim in Ferrara, and she's saying that it was not only a question of tolerance, but that the Este family was making a point on conversion and was making a point in their relationship with Spain. I think that if we want to understand what has been ghettoization, we should start from the Italian wars. And even from the idea that Jews themselves had of what was happening around them. There is an interesting document in the Zonne catalog of archives and libraries, of Jewish archives and libraries that he made in the 30s, in 1 century ago, just before the racial laws. And he said that there are correspondences about the involvement of Jews in the sack of Rome within the German army. This could be something real or not, but this is something that we have to work about in our future research. Let me say some thanks at this point. Okay.
Thank you, Serena. I think this point is very important. I hope there are colleagues of yours and students who will collect these suggestions and go on with more research and come to you, to Emily, to David, to Giuseppe for to discuss this, to research further these issues and in new ways. I'd like to, there are a few questions that we have in the question and answer, and I wonder if, Serena, you want to begin answering some, and maybe Emily and David too will see some that they want to comment on.
Okay, I will try. The first one is by Andrew Witterby, who is asking something about the dimension of the ghettoization. In reality, in different different moment, the Pope authorized, different popes authorized, allowed the ghetto to become a little bigger. And if you go, when it will be possible again, if you come to Rome and to the Jewish Museum of Rome, they have clear maps of the different dimensions of the ghettoization up to the end of the story. The same, another question by Andrew Viterbi, I found about the Viterbis and Rome and the history of people coming to Rome from the countryside. Okay, I found some Viterbi sacerdoti, Viterbi Cohen, that are important, that were important rabbis and bankers during my time, and they are quoted and indexed in the index of names. Again, when it will be possible to fly back and forth from the United States to Rome, I am pretty sure that the archive of the Jewish community could help you to if you want to know exactly everything about the different Viterbo families in Rome, you should come to Rome and go to the archive, and they will help you.
And there is a Susan Aronoff.
Where is she? Okay, do you think it was do you think it was the value of Jewish commerce to the Christian community that benefits authorities by creating stability and dispersion? I think that the question of safe conduct and commerce should be addressed by different perspectives. On one side, there is the question to the traditional counter-reformation perspective. Keep the Jews within the Christian states in order to convert them. On the other side, there is the question of state building in early modern. Again, it's politics. We organized someone of our public was there, a huge conference 3 years ago in Washington, in Maryland and Baltimore about state building and Jews during the long Renaissance. And I think that if we think to taxation, we should remember always the question of state building during the early modern, even for Jews. The Camerlengo acted in a certain way, even because he was the responsible for fiscal wealth of papal states. He needs money. Any states all over the time needs money to do what a state is supposed to do. And for this reason, the Camerlengo needed people make business and needed people to pay taxes. And this worked for everybody, even for Jews. I'm asking to Emily and Evid if you want to add something.
Yes, I wonder if we want to, each one of you wants to make a final, a closing statement on the discussion, and then that hopefully will bring to more of these meetings.
My only comment is, I guess we could also call it sort of a historical comment. I'm delighted to have been invited to participate in a discussion of a new high quality piece of scholarship based on archival sources. There's a history in the study of Italy's Jews of research proceeding along separate tracks that usually don't meet. That is to say, people who are close to the archives and in the archives on a daily basis for 20, 30 years, you know, throughout their careers, and sort of armchair historians who have books and sometimes microfilms of manuscripts and so on, but they operate at a distance. And Shlomo Simonson made this valuable attempt for many years to create conferences that would bring them together. There are not that many examples of scholarship in which you actually see cross-fertilization between these two types of research. Everybody recognizes the value of the other track, but people don't usually cross the line. So that's a direction that I would encourage and be delighted to participate in.
Emily?
I remembered in time. On mute. I will second what David said. although with the caveat that we don't know if any of us will be able to become the kind of deep archival scholars that used to be more possible, because we don't yet know what the post-COVID future looks like. I really hope that it can lead us to creative new directions in archives and in collaboration. I will also say that it is such an exciting time to be working on these topics with so much engaging new scholarship and so many new questions being asked and so many new findings. Can I say findings being found? I'll say it. New findings being found about topics that were that we thought were familiar. And Serena's book is such a rich part of that, and it's really exciting. I think for Italian history, for religious history of all kinds, for the history of Rome and early modern Italy, that we should enjoy being in a moment of a renaissance of this kind of scholarship.
Thank you. Giuseppe, would you like to add a few considerations?
Not to ask, but to back the position of Serena, of the inclusion of the Italian history at least in the Jewish Italian history, in the Italian history at all. That is a problem. Now it is also a problem in Germany. It is very, very curious, very strange that in Germany we have in this year the celebration of 1,700 years of Judaism in Germany. But 1,700 years ago there was no Germany, but we are Jewish. That is important to see that we are the history of minorities is very important for the history of the European history. Judaism in Italy is important also because it is a long history. From 30th century until now, there is always a presence of the Jews. The most manuscripts, Hebrew manuscripts, are in Italy. The most archives are in Italy. As to say, it's not an exaggeration, it is this is for me as a plaidoyer, this is a defense, a citation, an input to study Italian history, Italian Judaism, because it's important for European history, European Judaism, and the world history at all. This is important one. And I would go further on philosophy, liturgy, and so on, but this is a final discussion. It's not my position now, and therefore I will break here. And I will thank all of you, and of course especially Natalia for inviting all of us, and Serena for the book. And we hope to follow up with other publication also in this history of Italian Jewry.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. And to our public that attended, please look at your follow-up emails so you can get information on the book and also sign up for our upcoming programs. I really hope, I think this book among, as I already said, and as already everybody stated, it's many qualities, can really help find new tools, new research tools, new ways to look at the past, and exit the nationalistic and identitarian lens that all too often we still use to read our history. So thank you very much all, and I look forward to seeing you at the next programs.